Hello, and welcome to the Big Yearning Podcast, released alternate Mondays at 5 p.m. UK time. We are two life coaches who really enjoy meaningful conversations about big questions. Our work and our lives have been shaped by these questions, and they've taken us to some amazing places in our lives and in ourselves. We all long for things, we all carry big yearnings in our hearts, and over the next hour or so, we hope to touch on some of these feelings and perhaps give you ideas or insights to help you get clearer about what you long for and how to get it. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Big Yearning Podcast. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing right now, a really massive warm welcome to you. If you're doing the washing up, if you're in the car, if you're out for a walk, whatever this podcast finds you doing, welcome and thanks for making the time to join us. My name is Alexander, and I'm the one who focuses on determination and personal strength and understanding, but I often forget to be present and enjoy what's actually going on around me.
And my name's Neil, and I'm the one who's somewhat more yin than yang.
So welcome to the latest episode 24. It's just really great to have you here. We do this for you guys. We really thrive off your feedback. When somebody drops us an email or they go onto our Facebook or our Instagram accounts and they leave a comment about something they've enjoyed or something they'd like us to talk about, it really just lights us up. We love knowing that you are listening, that you're following along with us, and that you're getting something out of these episodes. So thank you for joining us. Big warm welcome to returning listeners. And if you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. Pull up a chair and get comfy. We're going to start, as we do every episode, with our check-in. Now, a check-in is something that Neil and I do regularly between us, and we have some other friends we do check-ins with as well. A check-in is just an arranged time to pay attention to how we're actually doing. The person who is speaking is invited to just drop masks, drop pretenses. They don't need to show up as anything. They don't need to impress anybody. They don't even need to speak if they don't want to. But it's an invitation to just share whatever's real in that moment. And then anyone else who's present is just witnessing and being quiet, but paying absolute attention to everything that's being said. It's an amazing bonding experience, and it can be just a great way to start a day. It can just bring you into yourself, help you set intentions for the day, and just be really aware of what you're bringing in that moment. So, Neil, would you like to check in, mate?
Yes, certainly, Alexander. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling somewhat soft and a bit sensitive today, and I think that stems from yesterday, where I saw my dad for the first time since July, so the first time in about 8 months or so. As some people who listen to the podcast regularly may know, I've spoken about my dad before. He went into a care home last July. And I think it's fair to say that, we have quite a difficult relationship, or have done over the years in some ways. And in some ways, I feel a little bit ambivalent about going to see him. So I was a little bit trepidatious, and also, hadn't seen him in a long time. But the visit actually went really well. And what I sensed from him was that he was kind of relieved, I think, to see me. He was pleased, but also relieved in a sense, in the way of, things are getting a little bit back to normal. I can see my 3 children now a bit more regularly, and it's probably going to get a bit easier, fingers crossed, as we come out of lockdown progressively. So that was really nice to experience that, his sense of, greater sense of ease, greater sense of being relieved. He was still the same old grumpy so-and-so that I know, but there was a little bit more kind of softness and receptivity there. So that was really, really lovely. And I think going forward, I think I'll look at maybe visiting him once a month. It's a little bit of a kind of trek for me, and not driving and trying to make the public transport work and everything. So it feels good to commit to a certain kind of regular time and schedule in terms of seeing him. So, it's an ongoing life thing for me, Alexander, to keep on processing my emotions around my dad, around family stuff, around upbringing. But I think I'll finish by saying, it was a good visit, felt pleased, didn't have any kind of really strong reaction of a negative kind afterwards, and okay to feel kind of a bit soft and sensitive around it. And then after that, I had a really delightful afternoon. I went bird watching. A big smile on your face because I'm about to regale you and listeners about another bird watching episode in the life of Neil. So me and my friend Mel, we went down to the RSPB reserves at Shapwick Heath and Ham Wall, just outside Glastonbury, and it was just so lovely. And what really struck me was that there were quite a few people about, and it was like people again were in kind of lockdown's easing a bit mode, and all different kinds of people down there. There were really serious birders with their big long telephoto lenses, and there were other people with small kind of binoculars just sort of like ambling around. And that in itself was lovely, just this whole sort of inclusive scene of all different types of people enjoying the same thing. And what really struck me was the beauty of the place. I mean, I don't know if you know the Somerset Levels, but it has this really magical beauty, really kind of really big skies, kind of similar to the Fenland in East Anglia. So really big skies, really open vistas, lots of reed beds and lots of lakes and pools. And the colours, the vibrancy, it was like the most beautiful kind of place I'd been since the beginning of lockdown, really. Again, it was a real reminder that, where I live is lovely and my local walks are lovely, but it felt like there was this kind of sense of expansiveness of walking out into this raw natural beauty again. So that was lovely. And I'm just going to do, as I agreed with you, a very short bird list, not an extensive one, not all the 28 species that I saw, but highlights of today were marsh harriers, great egrets, whitethroats, and a green sandpiper. So that was lovely. Just being out there, enjoying nature, enjoying the countryside. Like I said, feeling a bit expansive, spending some lovely time with a friend. That's me. And really looking forward to this episode, as I always do. That's me.
Thanks, man. Thank you for sharing. Okay, my check-in. I am mostly just feeling a little bit weary physically. Last week, I trained really, really intensely. It was my beasting week. I'd spent quite a few months building up my physical fitness again. I think just during the lockdown, I would say that one of the things the lockdown gave me was it forced me to learn how to rest, which is something I've always sucked at. But I did just feel sort of weak and slow and just not very embodied. I didn't really feel my physical body very keenly. It wasn't a really strong connection. So I've spent the last few months building up my fitness. Then last week, I'd set aside the whole week. I did almost no work, hardly any client work. And I just trained really intensely. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. I did some bits of it with friends. I did some bits of it alone. Some of it was in the gym. Went for a massive long bike ride. I went for a long weighted hike with a gorgeous corgi puppy called Pickle. And the whole week was just fun. And it was brilliant sunshine. And I just really enjoyed last week. But I am left very weary. And my whole body just sort of feels like, yes, need to rest now. So this is a very dedicated rest week. I did make a fun little video of the week, so if anyone listening to this would like to go and watch that video, if you hop onto YouTube, I think if you search for Deep Coaching Beasting Week, it will come eventually. You'll see pictures of my face, and you'll probably see pictures of Pickle, this lovely little corgi puppy. That's quite a big thing for me at the moment, just sort of recovering from that, but feeling strong and feeling like I'm back in the game with training. Physical training is really important to me, and it feels good to have come home to that, to have come back to that after such a long break. Other things that are up for me at the moment, a good friend of ours was in a high-profile court case as part of the Extinction Rebellion movement last week, and he was acquitted. All 7 of them were acquitted of their case, even though they were told by the judge that there was no defence in law for what they had done. They had caused £25,000 worth of damage to Shell headquarters, and that was known. That was there was evidence, there was photos. Everyone, the 7 members of Extinction Rebellion who were in the dock it was quite clear they had caused that damage. But the approach they took was very much to simply speak from the heart and say how important it is that we stand up against climate change. If we want the well-being of our children, if we want the well-being of all children to be safe, then we can't just keep playing along this game. We can't let society simply destroy the world. We're going to have to rebel. We are going to have to stand against this. And they just spoke very passionately, and the jury, after a very long deliberation, decided to acquit them. And that's just stirred up a lot for me. Actually, some hope for the first time in a long time that when normal people are asked to adjudicate in these kind of situations, when it isn't the law and it isn't massive corporations and it isn't a few billionaires who own our media, when it's just normal people, we do get it. We do respond well to this. And there's a little bit of hope there. And for me, a tiny smidgen of pride, because just like when we did our episode on death and dying a while ago, I spoke about how I wrote just from random words about my friend Roy when he died, and they ended up being read out at his funeral. I also wrote a character reference for our friend as part of this trial, and that was read out as part of the trial. And it spoke to his passionate love of justice and how he will put himself in harm's way in order to see that young people, see that children of the future are safe. And I can only hope that touched the jury and that was important. And it sort of made me think, yeah, actually, my words are one of my gifts to the world. And I suppose the only other thing I wanted to talk about in this check-in was about, I sort of feel like coming out of lockdown is a lot like taking a box of stuff out of storage. And I'm just sort of opening this box and taking these objects out that have enormous emotional meaning for me and just remembering aspects of myself, things from my past, ways I used to feel, things I used to be passionate about. And I remember that throughout my 20s, I was really passionate about changing the world, about shaping things, about using whatever gifts and privileges I have in order to do good things in the world. Now, if you've ever tried to run a business and actually tried to make it viable and tried to make a living out of running your own business, you'll know it takes all your energy and all your focus. And really, my more recent years have just been more and more and more focused on how do I keep my coaching business thriving and how do I make sure that I'm still available to show up for my clients? How do I pay the bills with that business? And just one of these things, I think partially this Extinction Rebellion trial and also just this sense of coming back to myself after the lockdown. I've just remembered all of my idealism and how I really, really wanted to be part of a movement, but part of something big. And that's live for me at the moment. That's big. I'm not sure how to integrate it. I don't know if I have the energy and the capacity right now at this stage in my life to do it. But it's useful to remember that used to be so important to me. I used to define who I was based on that passion to do big things. And it's just, I think it's important for me to remember that and hold on to and keep that flame alive, even as I have to do all the practical stuff of now. So that's big for me. That's simmering away inside me. I think altogether that's probably my check-in for today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, so that brings us on to our topic for today. And our topic today is, what is love? This was a subject that I suggested. Neil and I regularly meet and we talk about the podcast and we plan episodes and we decide things. And I said, can we please do an episode on what is love? And that triggered a big conversation between us, and we'll be rehashing bits of that conversation for you today. But it became really clear to me that this has been on my mind for a long, long time. And behind the word, there are so many meanings. There are so many things that we mean when we say the word love, whether it is looking into the eyes of our partner and saying, I love you, whether it is saying, oh, I really love this game, whether it's giving your mate a big hug at the end of a night out and going, I love you. You know, whether it's any of these things, we mean so many things by this word, and it's given such a carte blanche by our society. It's given a get out of jail free card. If you say the word, you've said something really important, and we probably shouldn't inquire too much. So when Neil and I were discussing this, it became clear that I have done a lot of thinking about this. And I thought, well, where did this come from? And It's something I mentioned a while ago on the podcast, but when I was at university, there was a very charismatic lecturer. He's the man who convinced me to get into philosophy and theology in the first place. Very charismatic theologian called Peter Vardy, Dr. Peter Vardy. And he has this famous speech that he gives in order to convey to people the importance and the value of studying philosophy. And it always begins, imagine you're sitting with your partner, someone you love deeply. If you don't have one, then imagine you have someone, and you're gazing into one another's eyes, and they say to you, I love you. And you reply, yes, but what do you mean by that? And he sort of goes on to say, as we get old, will you still love me? As I become old, crippled and incontinent and ugly and all these sort of things, will you still love me then? Will you care for me when I'm going senile? What do you mean by love? What is this word and why have you used it? And I think as a young man, I was sort of struck by that no, what are you doing? This word is sacrosanct. This is not a word that we criticize. This is not a word that we challenge. We should hold this sacred. But he was, and he challenged us to deconstruct it and to think about it. And so I felt compelled to come up with a defense for love. And I think it's just kind of been on my mind ever since then. But what I've discovered, I guess, a lot through doing all this personal development stuff that I've spent the last 20 years doing and doing through the coaching stuff is there is something really profound and almost magical about love, about the nature of love. But it's important, like really important, that if something has that much value, if something can help us to heal and help us connect with one another in such a profound and sometimes life-changing way, then it's really important that we deconstruct this word, that we don't just leave it alone and allow it to have all these murky background secondary meanings whenever we say it. So we're trying to get away from any kind of a hippie, hey man, I love you, just allowing love to be this all-encompassing, yeah, of course, love's amazing. We're trying to get away from that. We're kind of trying to do the opposite of that today. We're going to take it apart. We're going to deconstruct it. We're going to explore, what does this word mean? Why do we use it? Why does it feel so powerful for us when we say it? And then I'm hoping that where we get to at the bottom of that is to be able to explore this underlying magic, this mystery, which I believe exists around this word. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from this. Neil, have you got anything you want to say before we dive in?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for all of that, Alexander. As you said, yeah, we discussed this, didn't we, a few days ago, and had a very in-depth and rich conversation about it. And when I contemplate this question, what is love? Well, the first thing that came up for me was this quote by the Dalai Lama, quite a famous quote by him, where he says, "My religion is kindness." And where that took, so that may seem a little bit tangential, maybe not speaking to what is love directly, but nonetheless, that's what popped into my heart and mind. And then that took me to a point of view where I think that I'm interested in love as an action, as a behaviour, maybe as an interaction, as opposed to some kind of esoteric, intangible kind of non-applicable kind of thing. So I'm interested in love in action, what it really looks like. And for me, the most obvious and tangible expressions of love for me are kindness and care. And things like consideration, being sensitive to others, and what's going on around me. So that was my kind of first sort of response to this question of what is love. And then, one of the things we talked about was what sense our culture makes of this word and what choices our culture gives us in terms of how to define this word and how to use it. And one of the things that I find is that, for me, love is an incredibly vague word. It can have a multitude of possible interpretations and meanings. And I feel that because of that vagueness, sometimes it doesn't have a lot of utility, a lot of practical kind of usage. So very simply put, for this topic and this podcast, I'm interested in what are we actually talking about here? That's what I'm really interested in. Also, just staying on the kind of cultural theme in terms of what our culture offers us in terms of this word and this concept. One of the things it offers us is a notion of romantic love. So your classic kind of Hollywood kind of culture, kind of heterosexist boy meets girl, happy ever after, happy ending kind of thing. And I kind of see that sort of stuff as very, very limiting and very constraining, quite prescriptive, because to me it sort of says, here's this one size fits all love thing. This is how this is what you should be saying. This is how you should be behaving, and this is what the end product is. And it's not to say that I don't experience something like romantic love. I mean, I've had my heart fluttered, a lot in my life kind of thing. But in terms of it being something which has got any sort of, real utility value, I really question that. So I'm really delighted to kind of be here and, as you said, kind of deconstructing this word and kind of taking it apart. I think I'll stop there for now. Those are my thoughts. So, yeah, I'm into looking at this topic and looking at its kind of utility, its practical application, and also for me, very much so at the forefront of my heart and mind, is that love is about kindness and care, those kinds of things, those kinds of expressions. Yeah, that's me for now.
Okay, so we're going to kick off with just going through some things that we tend to mean when we say the words. The point of this is to explore them, expand them, get really clear on them, so that what's left, when we reduce back down to its most essential element, can be the thing that we mostly focus on in this conversation. So we're just going to go through a whole bunch of things that we mean by love. I've got loads of them because, as I say, I've been thinking about this for years, ever since Peter Vardy challenged me to think about this. I've been looking for definitions, looking to understand when we say it in different situations. I'm thinking about when we say it when we're in a romantic relationship, when we say it between friends, when we say it about a thing, when we say it when we're feeling very vulnerable, when we say it to our children, or when our children say it to us. So any of those kind of situations and more. What do we mean by this word? What are the layers of meaning behind this word? So I'm going to call out some meanings, and we might have a bit of discussion about them, and we'll just see where this goes. The first one is what I'm going to call being in love. So it's that intimate, passionate, usually romantic kind of being in love. It's the thing that we feel usually at the beginning of a relationship, but not limited to it. It's primarily, in my mind, a big rush of hormones. That's what it is. It's the bonding hormones that help us to form a family unit so we can then go on to have children. So when we look at our partner and our heart flutters and our tummy kind of wobbles and we're just gazing into their eyes and we feel like we could drown in their eyes right now, and we're just, I'm so in love with you. I'm not mocking this state. I adore this state. I mean, it's one of the nicest things you can feel. But it's a hormonal response. It's similar to when parents have children. At the moment a child is born, primarily in the mother, but also in the father, there is this colossal release of hormones so that when you see your child, you bond with it and you fall utterly in love with this child. And you want, you want to protect it and care for it and be with it through all the hard stuff that's about to happen. So that's the first thing. It's this hormonal rush that is being in love, being transfixed by love, being overwhelmed by how good it feels to look into the eyes of someone you love. That's the first one. Anything to say about this one, Neil?
I don't know. I've got a lot to say. I just think your definition, your describing of that is really. I'm just smiling at it. I think I'm smiling at the sort of naturalness of that, of the sort of the natural kind of. Oh, this is how humans are built, this is how humans are constructed in terms of making those connections and bonds. And it's interesting in some ways when you said bonding hormones, I suppose there's one way in which that can be perceived as being, somewhat kind of biologically mechanistic, But actually, I found myself kind of smiling, and I just remember those times when I had those rushes of bonding hormones, and my whole sort of being is transfixed, and the object of my love becomes the only thing that exists in my world. So yeah, very lovely, very articulately expressed. Great.
Yeah. I mean, with none of these definitions am I trying to be reductionist. They are all valid. and they're all important. And I'm sorry, guys, we have a body, and we are mostly just squirts of hormones. So it's okay for it to be big influenced by our physical body. So that brings me on to this next one.
Before you go on to that next one, I think what you said there is very quotable. Emotionally, we're just squirts of hormones. So I hope the listeners have got that.
I'm going to wait for one of my clients to quote that back to me in a session. Okay, a definition of love number 2, desire and lust. So I'm looking at you and you're just gorgeous and I can't wait to tear your clothes off. And at that moment, it can feel very loving. It can feel very intense. It doesn't have to. Well, I'm sure we've all had intimate sexual encounters that didn't include love. But it can all get bound up together. So desire and lust can feel like love, and it's what we might mean when we say I love you at a particular moment. I am transfixed by the physical beauty and the desire that I feel for you right now. That overwhelming feeling can be interpreted as love, and it can be one of the things we mean by the word. Any response there, Neil?
I haven't yet got squirty hormones off my mind, so I can't quite focus. I suppose for me, it's good and helpful that you kind of separate those first two, while at the same time acknowledging that they're very kind of closely interrelated. Again, I think about the kind of the natural humanness of what goes on between people and within people.
Okay. Definition number 3. Again, I just want to reinforce that none of this is judgmental or critical. This is just definitions. The next one is what I'm going to call need, or even infantile craving. And again, I'm not being pejorative with that word. I'm not saying that we're all, there's something wrong with us. But intimate relationships can be the time when we get to take off our masks, let our hair down, and really let somebody in. And it can be an opportunity to let your inner child come out to play. And what we needed as children was to be loved, to be held, to know we were safe. And there is a totality of connection in young people, in especially in infants, when they're gazing up at mum, gazing up at dad, and they feel safe and they feel held in that moment. And sometimes when we say to somebody, "I love you," what we're saying is, "You make me feel that again. You make me feel that safety and that wrapped upness." But it can become a need. And I remember times for me in intimate relationships, we would move from the language of "I love you" into the language of "I need you." I wouldn't be okay without you. Sometimes that's what we mean when we say the word love, when we say "I love you" or "I feel love." Sometimes what we mean is "I need you. I wouldn't be safe without you. My inner child would not feel okay unless you were here holding me in the way that you are." So, yeah, that is another thing we mean when we say love.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've got some thoughts about that. It's really interesting there because I recognise in myself this need for safety and security in intimate relationships. And I think in some ways, for me, this notion of like "I need you" can be quite pejorativized, if you like. I suppose what's really important is to make those needs around safety and security kind of conscious and explicit and clearly communicated within an intimate relationship, so that we know what it is that we're wanting. So there's nothing wrong in seeking safety and security, for example, as an expression of love and care and kindness within a relationship, as long as you're kind of really clear about that. Because for me, it's like there's this phrase "I need you," and then I step back from that phrase and I think, well, yes, I do, in as much as I need someone else. I'm a social animal. I'm a social being. I need people for a whole host of things for me to kind of feel okay as a human being, and like I kind of fit and belong in the world. So, yeah, I suppose so. Just a little bit of kind of qualification around that, I suppose. I suppose that's part of our kind of unpacking it. Does that make sense, what I've said?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, okay.
The next one I have, I guess, leads on from that. It's when we realise when we understand that love has huge value, that it is a thing that is valuable, that is kind of given between people, almost like a transaction, then sometimes we say it in order to achieve something, in order to get something, or in order to tell somebody that this situation is important. And it can be a way of saying, "Don't leave me," or avoiding abandonment, or securing something. Sometimes we say, "I love you," but what we mean is, "I want you to know how important this situation is to me." And sometimes that can be said in a really tender way. And sometimes it can mean, "I need this not to end. I don't want to be abandoned. I don't want to be on my own. I don't feel okay alone. So I'm going to say these words to you because you'll understand how important this situation is to me." I think that's something we sometimes mean when we say, "I love you." What do you think of that one, Neil?
Yeah, I think very similar to what I said in response to the last point, Alexander. I think it's okay, so for me, that's about being vulnerable. It's about kind of, if I can acknowledge, please, this is what I feel, or I believe, maybe more accurately, what will happen to me if you leave me, if we separate. So for me, again, it's like not masking that, those thoughts or that belief, not hiding behind the phrase "I love you" when I'm trying to communicate that. Rather, take the step of being vulnerable and saying, I believe, I feel that what will happen to me if you're not with me is ...
Yeah,
So
yeah.
So again, I think as we talk about this and you offer these reflections, these definitions, for me, it's really important to acknowledge that all of the things you're talking about, they're not bad or wrong per se. They're absolutely fine as long as they're communicated clearly. The problem comes along when they kind of masquerade as something else. Then it becomes
Absolutely,
more,
yeah.
Then it becomes more kind of shady and murky and difficult for two people to disentangle. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really hoping that's what this conversation is how this is going to be useful for people listening to this. Because on the one hand, I'm really looking forward to getting to what I think lies underneath all this. But on the other hand, we say so many things when we say these couple of little words. And the conversation that can happen and the possibilities for connection and healing that happen when you stop using the shorthand. You don't use these little words, but instead you expand it out into the bigger language. And you, as you say, it can be very vulnerable to say to someone, "Well, I need you," or whatever complex thing you're feeling. Then instead of using the shorthand version of love, okay, take the step, unpack that, let that expand into more words and more language, and open yourself up to the risk of that. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, in response to what you said about shorthand, I have this phrase which I've had for a number of years, and that is "go longhand." So at the risk of using what you think might be too many words, or you might believe you're being too wordy, or you're being verbose or whatever, no, just take that risk. Use as many words as you feel you need to communicate what is going on for you. And that, my experience is then that gives the person receiving the words greater opportunity to really understand what's going on for you, what you're trying to communicate, even if it is, like you say, vulnerability inducing and a bit stumbly and fumbly. Yeah.
Moving on, I'm realizing that I've written this great long list. I'm realizing that quite a few of them overlap, and a lot of them do come back to this ideas of need. So I've got things like codependence and interdependence, and I think a lot of that comes back to just wanting someone to know how important this moment is for you, and sometimes, yes, that letting out this childhood need, which still needs to be resolved, which still needs to be cared for. Which Neil and I talk about self-parenting, and we really hope that people can kind of take an adult handle of that and get control of it. But sometimes when you feel really safe and you've really let somebody in, then you do just lapse into these infantile sort of ways of operating. So it can be that. Another one I've got here is bliss or ecstasy or in a religious setting, it can be kind of that religious ecstatic state of just total oneness with God, with the universe. Love, the word love is very important, in all religions. It popped up a lot in the Abrahamic religions that I studied. Christianity uses it a lot. Islam uses it a lot, especially the sort of Sufi side of things that I have also trained in. Love, really, in those situations, talks about the bliss, the annihilation of self, which happens when we are at one with this ultimate highest state. All religions seem to have a manifestation of that. The shamanic stuff that I've trained in and studies has a version of it. I'd be quite interested to hear, Neil, whether you think Buddhism has anything to say about that. But there is just this idea that, there are sort of two directions that we can go in terms of our growth. And one of them, and primarily the one that I deal with in my coaching work, is downwards into the darkness and into the individuation of self. But if we go upwards into the light, we get to the sort of oneness and losing ourselves in the highest possible state, in the infinite, in what is often termed God. So that is, the word love is often used for that. And I also think that exists between people. Sometimes we touch that state of overwhelming bliss and ecstasy and the annihilation of the individuation. And in this moment, I am with you. I am one with you. And there is, I'm awash with that. I am overwhelmed by that. And that I would call love in that moment. So that's another thing I think that we mean by that. There's a whole bunch of stuff. What do you think of that, Neil?
I'm really pleased you've included that. My sense is that, like you said, you've kind of looked into this stuff and delved into it maybe more than I have. So, well, it takes me back to days when I used to do sort of long meditation retreats, just sat on my cushion in silence with a whole group of other people. And when you were talking about things like oneness, my experience of what I think you're alluding to there was, I'd be sitting on my meditation cushion, or not just sitting. I might be doing some not sort of formal meditation, but I'm in a meditative environment. It's those moments when subject and object collapse in on themselves. So there's no me, there's no other. There's just this moment-to-moment existence, which seems very kind of open, unconstrained. The Buddhists have a word for it. So it's nirvana or nibbana. They call it the unconditioned, the deathless. There's quite a lot of, within the Buddhist tradition, as things are often kind of defined, I find, in terms of a sort of negative, in terms of what they're not, or the absence of things. But for me, it's and I've had some of those experiences, and I think they're important because I think they touch into the state of what I believe it is to be truly human. And I suppose what I mean by that is that ultimately I don't think we are separate from everything around us, that we are. This sounds such a kind of spiritual cliche, but I don't know how to say it otherwise. But there is a very deep sense of interconnectedness in our lives, in all the life around us. We're dependent on so many other things for our individual existence. So it's a bit of a ramble there, but I do, intuitively in my heart, I can feel, oh yes, great that you've mentioned that and you've kind of drawn attention to that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is the culturally imposed fantasy that we see, as you mentioned earlier, in Hollywood. You see it in Disney movies. There's, it's usually the pursuit and the very early relationship stuff. And so far I've been talking about feelings that we actually have. So it comes from in me, and this is the state that I occupy, and then I want to share it with you, with someone else, with a friend, or with a child, or with my partner. But there is also this big lump of stuff which is a drama, a theatre that we're all acting out because we were conditioned, usually in our childhoods, but certainly throughout our lives, by movies and TV and books, perhaps, that say this is what love is meant to be, and it's meant to have all these accoutrements. It's meant to have, it's meant to involve getting married. It's meant to involve all these things that you do together. It's supposed to be totally closed off from the rest of the world. It's just you and your partner, or you and one person, but it's a very private thing, and it's supposed to feel like this at all times. This is what love is. So sometimes when we say this stuff to each other, what we're saying is, aren't we doing a good job at measuring up? Aren't we? Look at all these things, the boxes that we're ticking. Look how well we're doing in pursuing this fantasy. And I mean, it can feel amazing as well, because in the same way that I still feel these big surges of excitement around Christmas, because when I was little, it was such a massive thing, I still have these desires to have all of these situations, to have a wedding, for example, that looks a certain way. There's a bit of me that probably still feels like that. And I know that's a strong thing, especially for women, that women are often conditioned to want a certain type of wedding. So there's all these kind of like little messages and ideas that we're supposed to live up to and supposed to embody and supposed to manifest. And if our relationship or if our connection with somebody doesn't look like that, then we've failed. So sometimes when we're saying I love you, what we're kind of saying is we're measuring up, we're doing well. I feel right now like the movies look. I've got that feeling that the Disney princess has when she's kissed by Prince Charming and she has true love's first kiss. That's the feeling I have right now. So sometimes that stuff is at play.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said in my introductory bit, I feel like I kind of wised up quite early to that whole sort of Disney Hollywood thing, in terms of those sort of cultural messages, those cultural norms around love and romance and all of that. So, it's interesting to hear you speak about it, because I wonder sometimes whether I've sort of turned away too much from that, whether I've become almost a little bit cynical, so possibly ruling out the possibility of a sort of, Love Actually kind of scenario or whatever. I don't know. It's just a sort of wondering out loud, really. But I think what I would say is that I think we really underestimate the potency of all those sort of cultural messages. It's almost like we kind of swim within them. Really difficult to, you're kind of like a fish sort of swimming in water. You don't really know you're in water, kind of thing. So I think it's always good to drill down and really inquire about, okay, what's going on here between, say, me and someone else? Is it something that is truly coming from me and the person that I'm with that's being constructed there? Or is it something that is coming out over my left shoulder from the culture that is being played out, that I'm playing a role, that I'm, like you say, aren't I doing well? I'm measuring up. And the word that comes up for me, as you talked about all of that, Alexander, was comparison. And within that, there's for me, there's a degree of insecurity, because it's like, I'm having to kind of compare myself to some perceived required standard. And it's kind of like anxiously, am I doing well enough? Am I doing okay? So I think that's one to really watch out for.
Yeah. It's funny, that's now taken me down a whole rabbit hole in my head of stuff that I hadn't really thought about and hadn't made any notes for. But I'm thinking there's a whole element to love, and especially intimate relationships, but all kinds of love which are defined. Okay, so they are defined externally. They are cultural things, but they're not that sort of, this is how you should be. It's almost like a blessing on, and almost a reassurance that this is okay, that you're doing okay. And I think about weddings. I've got various friends who, they didn't want anyone there. They just wanted to. They thought the whole thing was silly. They wanted the tick box. Okay, so fine, we're actually going to get married. But I have two friends who just went off to Vegas and they got married, and then they did a little tour across America. But for me, it's always been important that all my friends are going to be there. My family is there. It's like this. It's a declaration in front of a group for me of this is my one. This is my partner, and I suppose there's an element to this, especially if we touch on like romantic love. There's an element about this which is that we've made it, that this is what we're supposed to be like. This is what we're supposed to be doing. I sort of imagine or remember, the first time we closed the door on our home as a couple. And it's like, oh, this feels so good. We've arrived in our home. This is our place. We're building this together. And how good that can feel. And this kind of surge of romantic love at that moment. And part of that, it's all these other different types of love as well. But a part of it, I think, is it's about that I don't know, that there's some sort of blessing there. There's some sort of broader sense of maybe belonging, maybe that we've come home, that this is what our whole culture has been telling me is the place where I should be, and now I'm here, and it just feels so good. I feel like I have had the blessing of my culture to have this moment. And there's positive sides and negative sides. There is this whole how much of that is being imposed on you and how much of that is inauthentic. But I'm also thinking about, if we think about sort of one of these idyllic tribal kind of situations that you and I sometimes talk about, in those, all of these rituals of bonding and joining or having children or whatever it is would be celebrated by the community. And the community aspect would be a huge part of our romantic love or our sense of love together. So, yeah, there is something there around this being bigger than just two people or being bigger than one situation.
Yeah, I very much chime with what you say. There is something about blessing. There is something about public witnessing. There is something about ritual and ceremonializing these events. I suppose there's something for me at core that if something isn't kind of publicly kind of witnessed and seen, then in some ways it doesn't quite exist in a real sense or in as much of a real way as it could do. And then I think also, it's so interesting, isn't it? There's a whole other topic really to talk about the role of rituals and ceremony around something like this, and how kind of, I suppose what I heard in what you were saying, Alexander, was that it can be a bit double-edged. So, and it makes me think of like, okay, we live in a culture where we have certain rituals and ceremonial practices, and some of them might be quite kind of vestigial. They may be quite a way removed from what they are the original shape they took, but they still have some kind of core vestigial meaning. And I think we've spoken in podcast episodes before about let's start from the place of using the rituals that we have, rather than kind of throw out everything. Let's see what we can bring to bear in terms of ceremonializing something or ritualizing something that gives it meaning, that gives it purpose, that gives it sustainability even.
Yeah. I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to press on. I've got a few others kind of in my little list, but I think we've covered the main ones that I wanted to talk about. Sometimes we mean thank you, or I really appreciate the situation we're in right now. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate the situation. Thank you for giving me this feeling. And sometimes we mean a kind of a letting my defenses down, a surrendering or a yielding to that experience. I'm going to let you in is kind of a thing. And that leads us neatly onto kind of my core definition really about love and the stuff that I think is most precious about this word. So I'm just going to talk about that a little bit. So having spent so much of my life working with concepts of individuation, about how we become unique individuals in our own right, and having seen the effects of trauma, whether that was very early life or things that we've picked up along the way, knocks we've picked up along the way, and the ways in which we harden and pull back and put up walls, and yet the big yearning that exists within, I believe, everybody, but certainly most people, to reach out and connect in a really meaningful way with other people or with a place, to have that kind of sense of belonging that we talked about in our last episode. There is a state where we have got to, as individuals, we have got to a place where we're a little bit hardened, we're a little bit jaded, we're a little bit pulling back from things, we're a little bit unavailable. And for me, love is the returning to our natural state, the state in which we were before all of these knocks came along, and all the ways that we had to learn to cope with all the things that happened to us in our lives, the ways that we have to learn to cope with a culture which needs us to be robust and tough and capable of taking knocks. So love is that which is not that. So to my mind, and in the simplest definition I can give you, my working definition of love in its most pure state is being open and available to connection. And when we say that to somebody, or if we think the word, what we mean is, in this moment, I choose or I find myself to be open and available to connect with you. That you might be a partner, that you might be a child, that you might be a piece of land, that you might be another being. But in that moment, I choose not to be hard and to pull back and protect myself and have my walls up. I am available right now. I am here and I'm open and I am ready to connect. And that, I believe, is our natural state. And it's a state of rest and peace. But it isn't going back to that, what I was saying earlier about that kind of infantile, I adore this and I need this and I must have this. It can be a very adult way to be. It's simply, I am here as me and I witness you there, as you, the being that is you, and I choose to open myself up and be available to you. So that's kind of when I'm talking about love, especially when I'm using it in a therapeutic sense, when I'm talking about it with a client, when I'm talking about the healing that can come about, what I'm talking about is that state. So that's kind of, having spent so much of my life initially triggered by this rowdy philosophy lecturer, and then having spent so much of my life working around personal development and around trauma and our responses to trauma, that has become my working definition of what we mean at the root of this word. Now, I initially brought this to Neil. We were having this debate. We were throwing words around and we were, trying to get to the bottom of this. And I think I started off by being a little bit ranty of just like, well, why do people call all these other things love when there's this amazing thing? And I said that, and it seemed to touch something in you, Neil. Like when I gave you my working definition, it seemed to have a meaning for you. How does it make you feel when I say that?
Well, yeah, it was really helpful and interesting when we had the discussion in preparing for this episode, because I think, like I said in my introduction, the first thing that came to my mind when I entertained this question, what is love, was that quote by the Dalai Lama, my religion is kindness. So there are those obvious and tangible kind of things about kindness and care that I spoke about. But then also a couple of other words that came to me when I contemplated this question were yielding and surrendering. And when those words came to me, before we had spoken, well, before you offered your definition, your take on, how you word what love is, I had an intuitive sense that those words are like yielding and surrender were important to me, were important in my thinking about this, but I couldn't quite make them connect. And then when you said, love is being open to connection, then it's like words like yielding and surrender, they kind of slid into place for me. So, and that took me to a view or a place whereby, for me, my take on that is love is about receptivity. It's about an attitude or an orientation of open-armedness, making space for something, allowing, inclusivity, acceptance. And what I found was really interesting when I kind of contemplated all of those kinds of words is that those, on this podcast, a central part of the podcast that we do is about addresses questions around like, what can we do? How can we change? What can we do? Whereas for me, the question of what is love is more about being in a receptive mode. So I have this image, this notion, this image of open arms. So, and also for me, there's something about opening to the way that things are, not going against nature, not going against what is, not fighting what is the experience that is in my present moment, what's going on in my present moment experience. Now, that doesn't mean kind of just being passive and giving into it. So there's this notion, this sense for me in which receptivity, I mean, this is quite a Buddhist thing, I suppose, really, the sense in which the receptivity is quite alert, and awake. So it's kind of ready to receive. So when you gave that definition, it was really helpful for me, and it really made sense of these words like yielding and surrender, open-armedness, making space. And then I feel, Alexander, that's a definition, that's a working definition that I can kind of take around with me. And even just in the last few days, that's been really, really helpful for me. So last few days, I've been struggling with a few, my mood's been a bit up and down, and I found myself being quite sort of grumpy and restless and a bit agitated and irritable. And then if I adopt a stance of, well, can I receive this? Can I just let this be here? So can I bring an attitude of love towards those things? So can I bring an attitude of love amidst an experience of fear or anger or anxiety or whatever it is? And for me, that's incredibly helpful. So it's not pushing those things away that I find difficult. It's allowing them to be present and kind of meeting them with that open-armedness, with a receptivity, even with a curiosity. I remember really strongly when I studied on the Buddhist path, there are several factors of enlightenment, 8 factors of enlightenment or something, and they all feed into each other. So for me, I mentioned curiosity because I think one of the factors of enlightenment is interest or curiosity. So like if I'm in a receptive state and I allow things to kind of be there, or allow things to kind of approach me and not try and push them away, then I can kind of get curious. I can, oh, okay, that's what this is. That's what's wanting my attention. And so for me, it's really interesting that if I think about love and being open to connection, then what does that mean? What are other words that I might describe open to connection being about? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as you were talking there, Neil, I thought about the word empathy. So if I think we put up defenses and we pull back from the world for really good reasons. I think it can be in such a busy and sometimes dangerous, or at least emotionally dangerous, sort of toxic kind of environments. It's really important to have boundaries and have defenses and be able to care for yourself. So that's what makes this state so remarkable. It really is a returning to something which could be potentially risky for you. But if we are available, if we are open to connection with another human being or with whatever, then we're more sensitive to what they're going through and how they feel. And that is empathy. Empathy is the art of being able to feel what somebody else feels, not simply to notice how we feel in response to it, but really being able to connect with what their emotional experience is. And to do that, we have to be available. So they very much go together. And that makes me think about that opening quote that you brought from the Dalai Lama about my religion is kindness. Because of course you're going to be kind in that state, because you feel what somebody else feels. And anything you might do that is damaging to that person, you're going to feel it yourself. I think it becomes very important and really probably one of the bigger challenges we can have is to be able to be in that state of openness and availability and feeling empathetically what someone else is going through, and yet be able to make choices that are good for us. Because there's going to be situations when I am open and available to connection with you. I love you. This being that you are is precious to me. And yet, perhaps I have to leave, perhaps I have to say things to you which I know are going to be challenging or even hurtful because they are my truth. They are things that you need to know. And that can be also very growth inspiring for a person to be able to hold the state of openness and yet go into those hard places, being fully receptive to what that other person is going through. That speaks to tremendous personal strength to my mind. And it really makes a mockery of the cultural idea that strength and toughness and lots of things that we see as being good are being closed off, are being tough and screw you lot, I'm just going to do what I got to do, and being a bit of a thug. There's a lot of cultural language and baggage around that. And yet, would that person have the strength to be really open and available, really loving, and yet say things that they know are hard? To me, that the strength of that vulnerability really speaks to somebody's character, to their capability, to their growth as a person. I just think things like that are remarkable. I really struggle with that sort of thing. So
the word that comes to my mind as you speak, Alexander, is inclusivity. So I think about, it's a word that has a lot of kind of traction for me, inclusivity and inclusion. But there's something for me about, as you're talking, as if I open myself up to what is, and I'm standing opposite someone else, there's something in me that goes on in terms of like, right, you're here too, you're included in this too, you're not separate from. Yeah, for me that has a lot of traction, and I suppose it echoes what you were saying about there's a lot of cultural value placed on strength and cutting things off and obliterating things and severing things and being separate, as opposed to, it's like if I'm with someone, I suppose I'm talking mainly about kind of love between people here. If I'm with someone, I can see them as, right, okay, you're here, you're just like me, okay, you're included in this too. There's that sense of, then I can kind of relax and breathe out a bit and know that it's okay and a connection has been made. And then the last thing I've jotted down in relation to this is resting state. So like what you were saying about, this has been our natural state. So I feel like when I can kind of be receptive and open up and find out that the world won't swallow me up whole, that someone can meet me and we can mutually meet, then for me that kind of openness, that expression of love, if that's what love is what we're talking about here, and for me that's our resting state, that's our natural state.
Yeah. I'm very aware of time. We probably need to start wrapping up our episode. So just any kind of closing thoughts at this point? I suppose one thing I did want to mention, just as one practical thing for anyone listening to this who's interested in exploring this stuff, is about the love languages stuff. There's a website for it, there's a book for it. And it's saying that there are these 5 core ways that we kind of expect to receive and share love. And if you know what your love languages are, it could just be really helpful, because you can understand why you're not getting what you need from a partner or from a situation. Or again, if your partner or your child or anybody around you isn't feeling like they're getting the love that you're really trying to give to them, you're putting a lot of effort into giving them their love and they're just not feeling it, it can be useful to kind of work out what their love languages are and then give them the love, show love in the way that they're going to receive it best. So I did want to mention that in this episode. Neil, have you got anything sort of to say as a closing remarks?
What strikes me as important about what we've talked about today, one of the things, is to go longhand. So again, thinking about the practical application of like the things that we talk about for people listening. If you're in a situation where you would kind of habitually say, I love you, or I love this, or you use that word, just really kind of think about, okay, what am I truly trying to say here? What am I really trying to communicate and express? What do I want? How do I want the other person to see me after I've finished communicating? So take the opportunity to use a few more words and to find words of your own that express who you are, what you want, what you need, what you desire. So to go longhand and to play around with it and find words that are your own to express those things about you.
Nice. Thank you, Neil. Okay, we're going to round up this episode there. I suppose one thing I do just want to say at the end is that we don't always have answers here. We're not always going to have a clear conclusion from the subjects. We're talking here about our big yearnings. We're talking about how do we get more of the things that we feel we most deeply need in our lives. And a lot of it includes fumbling and experimentation and just reflecting and allowing things to kind of grow through that reflection within us. So some of this episode has been very much delivered in the in the intention that, here's a thing for you to reflect on. And then a lot of it is just, we're fumbling with this too. So yes, that's the end of our episode today. Thank you so much for joining us. We do, as we say, really love knowing that you guys are listening. Whatever situation you're in, whatever you're doing while you're listening, it's great for us. So thank you for showing up and sticking with us. Please do give us your feedback. We want to hear from you. Are we covering the right subjects? Do you think we should talk about something else? Do you think we're hitting it just right at the moment? Do you want us to change the way that we're delivering things? Do you want us to speak in a different way? So whatever it is you would like to feedback to us, then please do use either the social media accounts for that, Facebook and Instagram, or if you want to get in touch with us personally, then you can do that. Neil, how does someone get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me, Alexander, is via my website, www.coachingforlifefroome.co.uk, and use my contact details on there.
Great. And if you want to get in touch with me, then you can go to my website, which is deepcoaching.co.uk. In the top right-hand corner, there's a button to book a consultation call with me. But if you click on that, you can also use that whole form to contact me. Just send me an email. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's how you do that. Next time, we're going to be doing our first ever interview. We're going to be welcoming Jamie Webb onto The Big Yearning. Jamie is a Brighton-based sports therapist. He owns and operates Brighton Sports Therapy. And he's been doing it for a very long time. And he's just got lots of really interesting things to say about physical injuries, about emotional well-being and how that relates to physical injuries, and just how we can live with sort of comfort and ease in our physical selves, in our physical bodies. So Neil and I are going to be interviewing him next time. Until then, in a fortnight's time, we'll say goodbye for now. So thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.
Cheerio, folks. Thank you.